mom loved y'all. She's threatening to move up here. She said that Rourke, the guest preacher last week, pretty much preached on the same sermon I preached on and have been preaching for the last 5 weeks because that's what the lectionary has asked us to do. But for the last 5 weeks, we have looked intensely at what it means to consume the love, the hope, and the faith, the flesh of Jesus. And we did this study to grasp what it means to be a part of this way of life, to see it. And now we come to the point where we see how it works. We did all that study, all that repetition, so we can finally get to the so what. Then now that we've done this, now that we have left the communion table, so what? And so we listen to the so what, or at least one of them found in Ephesians. Paul writes, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his power. Put on the whole armor of God so that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God so that you might be able to withstand on that day of evil. And having done everything, stand firm. Stand therefore and fasten the belt of truth around your waist and put on the breastplate of righteousness. As for your feet, put on shoes that will make you ready to proclaim the gospel of peace. With all of these, take the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of Spirit, which is the word of God. Pray. Pray in the Spirit at all times, in every prayer and in every supplication. To that end, keep alert and persevere." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So on our trip to Europe, we went to Copenhagen, down to Prague, and then Vienna. And we ate some of the local food. We drank some wonderful and some pretty awful drinks. I had an egg drink that I still don't understand. We saw art and zoos, and we rode on the Danube, and we kayaked on the Charles. But you all know your nerdy pastor. As you might have guessed, one of our favorite things was finding churches and learning about the local church culture. The church buildings were, as you can imagine, and for those of you who have been out of this world, they were beyond ornate, and of the famous churches, the ones that are on postcards, almost every famous church, you could guarantee that one side of the church was blocked by scaffolding because it was being worked on, which meant that they were spending a lot of money and must have cared deeply about the beauty of them. In Denmark, the organs were clearly adored because they looked like pieces of art. In Prague, it was hard to tell the difference between churches and palaces. And then when we were in Vienna, you'd walk about a block, and then suddenly out of these other fabulous buildings would spring another church, different from the last one, with its own architectural points and colors to prove. In Vienna, at St. Stephen's Church, tourists were only allowed in certain areas, the confessional, and the back of the church where you could leave your money. Also, in the back of the church, you could superimpose your head onto St. Stephen's stained glass. Yeah, it was as bad as it sounds. But there were some sections of candles, and I think I did the money correctly between the kroner and the Czech crowns and the euros I had. But I lit a candle for you, my church, my people, and I said a prayer of thanksgiving that you all were in my life. But then I had to move on quickly because there was a guy yelling at me that the next person wanted to say a prayer. But to be honest, that little 15, maybe less, second prayer I said was the most holy I felt in any of the churches. Even in all of their grandeur and with their thousands of years of history, there was something off. And even though these church buildings were full of tourists, they were empty of the church. These churches didn't have bulletin boards with playbills of the Music Man and pinned up pictures of baptisms. They didn't have hymnals with worn edges or pew racks that had been drawn on. They didn't have a sweaty, excited pastor eager to see all the people in the church. They just didn't have that thing that makes it real, that makes it human. As tourist attractions and concert halls, yeah, stunning. As places of gathering to share the love of God, they were underwhelming. Casey noted that so many of the government buildings and palaces we saw, especially in Vienna, that they were meant to intimidate. They were meant to prove how much money, how much power, how much glory they had. And this certainly extended to the churches. The churches were a part of that. The churches were a part of the dynasty, the money, the power, the glory. The churches were a part of a city proving a point. And while taking it all in, I realized that these churches were the visual metaphor of something we, the church of the world, have gotten so wrong these past many years. They and the Big C Church have put on the armor of a greedy world instead of the armor of God. We missed the point. That's why the lectionary wanted us to do all that repetition. That's why we studied those words. Which word means body and which word means flesh. They missed the point of the flesh that Jesus gave up for us. But it is indeed a point Christians have been missing even since the time of St. Paul. In his letter to the people of Ephesus, Paul ends with the words I read today. This is his final push. If you haven't heard me for the first 5 chapters, hear me now. This is his push for them to be the people with the worn hymnals and the chaotic bulletin boards. This is his final push to try and speak their language in hopes that they see a new life, a new language emerge. The Ephesians are in a strange time. Their government is very unsteady. The culture does not think very highly of Christians at all, and hotly contested politics are the main topic of every conversation. Sound familiar? Yeah. The culture of this time, perhaps more, perhaps less, was obsessed with power and proving their might over others. And when Paul writes to them, he is writing to them using the language that they hear every day. Sometimes we Christians think that these words are a call to military action, but he's really just trying to speak to them what they know. He does use military language of armor and helmets and power, but he turns it around. And this is where we have to pay attention. He says, that other country isn't our enemy. Terrorists aren't even our enemy. Flesh and blood is not our enemy. Our enemies are a system. Our enemies are the people who think metal armor is the only way to win. Our enemies are the people who think intimidation and ruthless acts of power are the only way to live, the only way to prove a point. Our enemies are the people who think God or religion is only powerful when it proves how exclusive it is. Today, we do not try to prove how powerful our God is with gold buildings and trained soldiers. It is easy for us, for pastors, to get confused about how to show others how powerful our God is. It's something that is innate in humanity, right? We want to show how powerful God is. And what do? We do it the only way the culture tells us, with might. That's what Paul is getting at here, that take a step back. Take a step back. Today's churches brag about how great their youth room is, and they worry about how much members we have, how many members we have, and who all gave. We brag about capital campaigns and all the money we raised, or how awesome our church band is. Today's churches think it can prove God's power and might by glorifying politicians, by ignoring, dismissing, and brushing aside evil acts, so long as that politician helps them win their battles. Who cares if the politician is a white supremacist, so long as he votes to keep churches tax-free? Who cares if that politician has abused women, so long as he hates gay marriage, abortion, and the Muslims? Who cares if she's corrupt, as long as we get free college tuition? I'm guilty of it. This is the wrong kind of armor. This armor says nothing of who God is. I hesitate to bring up this story because I don't want to speak ill of a particular denomination. I'm not saying that the Catholic Church has done anything worse than the rest of us have, because I'll have you know the Presbyterians are embroiled in their own battles in very similar ways. But this week, it was uncovered that the Catholic Church has spent thousands, millions of dollars and great amounts of energy lobbying against the statute of limitations lift. They were hoping to lift the limitations so that indeed we can go back and try the priests who committed sexual crimes against children. And the church has fought against that. They would prefer not to see their priests in legal trouble. Like it or not, I sure don't. These are our brothers and sisters and siblings in Christ. They too have been baptized in the very same waters we have, or that we will be baptized in. And it makes me wonder, where were their godparents? How did these individuals who believe in this so much turn it into something else? It makes me wonder why no one has stood up and said, yes, we're going to lose members and we're going to lose a ton of money. But we're going to do the right thing because that's the armor of God, the right thing to protect children, not their abusers. And it makes me wonder, as I read this sitting in a fabulous little cafe in Vienna, worlds apart from you, what kind of armor do we put on instead? We, the people of Calvary, we, the people of the Presbyterian denomination, we, the people of the worldwide body and flesh of Christ, what kind of armor do we need to put on to defeat the enemy? The enemy of status quo and greed and power and idolatry and the systems that make us not people anymore. Paul seems to think it's simple. Paul suggests prayer. Doesn't seem like a very big sword. And yet, a prayer never tries to prove a point. A prayer never has to close its eyes to corruption. A prayer never looks the other way. A prayer is armored by the truth, armored by simplicity, often armored by raw emotions, by vulnerability, by our deep questions and failures and surprises and thanksgivings. Think of even just how we embody prayer. Some of you pray like this, vulnerable with your bodies. I picture the soldier praying under the cross, crouched down. The soldier, a great being, right? Somebody to fear, but in prayer, she is folded down on her knees, and anyone could knock her or him over. Prayer seems like the opposite of what we're trying to do, and yet Paul says that's what you armor yourself with. I think there's a reason that it was hard to get people to catch on to Christianity when they had buildings decorated with Greek gods, muscles everywhere, perfection and gold. It's hard to say that this or this is powerful. When we were in Copenhagen, we stayed with a woman who rents out her back room. And, of course, we got to talking about religion. She, like almost all of the Danes, is not religious. In fact, I started doing some research, and only about 3 to 10% of Danes actually believe. That doesn't even mean they go to church. She said she doesn't really believe in the organized part of religion, and she doesn't even have a church home. But one of the reasons she knew English so well was that she married an American, and her husband's family is from right outside of Boston, and they belong to a little church there. She said, oh, this village is perfect, but it's also very hard to be in because there's nothing. There's no shopping mall, which, Europeans love to come to America for. There's hardly any grocery stores. There's no restaurants. And when she walked into the church, so much unlike the churches in Europe. It was pretty bad, she said. It was falling apart, and it had really smelly carpet. But there in that church, she said was the first time she ever felt like praying. And she did. She didn't find that moment of prayer in Copenhagen's many fabulous, perfectly ornate, perfectly clean churches. But she found it in a broken down one. I think that's what Jesus was telling us. His broken down body. The one we take on. The one we put to our mouths. That is where we find power. In broken places. And something tells me that her need and hope for prayer in that moment in that smelly carpet church was rather more about the community than the church building itself. And maybe once we strip ourselves of the things that we think we need to be successful as a church, or even the things that we think we need to be successful as parents or business people or neighbors or students or grandparents or retirees or just plain old people, we find that our great success is offering space. Offering space for others to find the protection of truth, righteousness, and salvation that is offered to all. It didn't strike me until I was awake for 12 hours on a terribly tiny plane how important her story was. I kind of brushed over it. But I thought, that's my prayer. That's my prayer, that today we offer space for people to figure out what it means to pray. To bow their heads or lift their arms as they notice the armor that God has already given them, their own brokenness. And so my family, who I lit a candle for, who gave me a moment of holiness, go out from here today and pray this same prayer and see what kind of armor you find yourself in. Gracious God, help me offer space for someone to pray, to feel your armor around them, even though I myself am not perfect. Amen.